Okay, good afternoon, DET for 2. I am Cadet Major Mejia, and I am joined today with none other than Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman, who's our special guest on today's podcast for a special segment known as Crucial Conversations. Colonel, would you like to introduce yourself, just the detachment again, once more?
Everybody, you know who I am, but for those few new people sitting out there in the crowd, so I've been your boss now for a little over 6 months. Took over at the end of July. My background, I'm an F-15E WISO, Weapons Systems Officer, but a CISO by the wings you see on my chest. So for all of you who want to go be a combat systems operator, I can talk to you all about it and what training means. But I've really enjoyed my time here, and as you've heard me say on multiple times, it's a great unit. I'm really proud of you all, and I'm happy to be here. So let's dig right into it.
Nice. So without wasting any time, we're going to jump into the first couple questions that we have here. Starting off with this one. So, before meeting today, we wrote up some of these questions that kind of piqued the interest of our detachment, the cadets, some of the people here, and things that you, cadre, as well wanted to kind of put out there. For this first one, we want to know, as a 2004 graduate of Mississippi State University, what initially motivated you to join AFROTC, serve, and how does that reach compare to what motivates you currently as you were still going on with your Air Force career?
I've mentioned it a couple of times in commanders' calls, but I haven't gone in depth. I imagine that my desires to join way back in 1999 when I was a freshman, and in 1998 when I was in high school applying for high school scholarships and all these opportunities for colleges I wanted to go to, I imagine it's not very different from a lot of cadets now. There was kind of a transactional need. I needed a way to pay for school. I applied to the U.S. Military Academy, so to West Point. I applied to the U.S. Naval Academy. I didn't apply to the Air Force Academy because we didn't really know that much about it. I'm from a very, rural area in Alabama, so the fact that my mom and I were doing most of the footwork without a guidance counselor at my school to help us, we were just applying where we could. And one of the other things, though, I did have, my high school principal knew that we had a local Air Force recruiter, and so he set me up with him for an Air Force RTC interview, which is very similar to what is going on now with the high school scholarship students who are getting interviewed by my cadre every week as they are trying to apply for scholarships. Anyway, long story short, I was able to get that offer from Air Force RTC, and Mississippi State was a school that I'd gone to visit with my mother. We loved it. It was relatively close to home and had the engineering program I wanted, and here's this full ride scholarship from ROTC to pay for all my tuition, and man, this is a perfect match. Let me go give it a try. As some of you may know, a high school scholarship winner gets the first year's free, essentially. If you have a high school scholarship, you can do all of ROTC for your first year. You can drop if you don't like it, and you owe the government no money. So we knew that. That was explained to us very clearly, and my mother and I and my dad, we've talked, and we said, well, let's go give it a shot, and if you don't like it, we'll find a different way to pay for school. So that was my initial reason. It was very transactional, which is not necessarily the thing that's going to keep somebody in an organization, right? It's the thing that gets you in the door. It wasn't very long before I realized that it was something much more. I made friends in ROTC. I had a senior. We were a smaller detachment than this one, but a senior who became kind of like a big brother, a mentor, and a coach. He wasn't an engineering student. He was a business major, but he was somebody who he kind of made it his goal in life to help mentor the young freshmen. There were a handful of us. He's like, here's how you go succeed. Here's how ROTC works. Here's how you can just succeed at college. And he was like a big brother to us. And that, along with a couple of the others who I got to meet and be around in that familial environment we had, our detachment was pretty close-knit among the cadets. I was like, wow, this organization is great. And then I had some cadre members. I still remember Captain Moore teaching my AS-100 class. And he was a great prior enlisted, had been in maintenance as an officer, and he was giving us a lot of those real life stories. And I was like, I understand now a little bit more of what I'm in. It's not just about me and this scholarship. It's about an organization that has hardworking people who are dedicated to something bigger than them. And I remember this conversation to this day. After my freshman year of college was over, I went home. I had to work all summer so I could make my spending money for the next year. A lot of you probably doing similar things. And my mother talks to me one day, and she says, "Do you still want to do this?" And I ask, "What do you mean? Do you still want to be in ROTC?" "Well, why do you ask that?" "Well, you know you can get out." And this was now summer of 2000. This was before the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War and all those things where it became something in the social consciousness of, hey, there's a lot of deployments happening. So that wasn't a fear in the back of her mind, but I think some of it was her asking, are you ready for the sacrifices that being in the military entails? And I said, Mom, I'm home. I'm at a place where I belong. I'm with people who are dedicated to something bigger than themselves, that are exceptional people. And I don't get that anywhere else. And I never looked back.
So that said, would you say, I mean, you're clearly stating it, that camaraderie, that feeling that you're having with your peers is what brought you in. We're a pretty big detachment here at DET 842, and I know last semester I had spent some time as one of the deputy flight commanders working directly with the GMC. What would you say to those that are still trying to find that kind of camaraderie, especially now in this environment we have where you can't really seek out that direct mentorship that you yourself were able to achieve, back when you were going through the program?
Well, I would counter a slight point. Just because you can't maybe spend a lot of time doing this type of interaction with another person in this detachment or anywhere else doesn't mean you can't socially interact. The technology that we have at our fingertips today is vastly superior to what I had as a freshman. I didn't get a cell phone until I was older in college. I mean, my freshman year, I wasn't walking around with one of those Nokia bricks. You can certainly still reach out to people. I encourage highly that, the detachment's set up, whether it's a flight or a squadron or just a club, something like, hey, let's have meetings. Are there some of you who like to play chess? Well, you don't need to be sitting at a chessboard to play chess. You could play virtually with a virtual chess option. Are there some of you who like World of Warcraft? As much as people may make fun of that, are there people who just like to read? Is there a book of the month club? And you can do a Zoom meeting to discuss the book of the month and the lessons that it teaches and what do you get out of it. There are ways that you can directly interact with your peers, and all of you as cadets are peers. There is a POC versus GMC requirement, right? This is a military organization, and we're teaching you those baseline fundamentals of how to be respectful to a superior officer, but it's also to be respectful to a subordinate. So yes, there has to be some of that relationship, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that you, Cadet Mejia, can't be a good mentor to some freshmen. Why can't you be? Why can't you be that big brother? And while I'm not going to sit here and say that there should be 15 of you with a mask off, all at Panera Bread having the conversation about the book of the month, maybe there can be those smaller interactions. Or you could sit outside. Sitting right outside this detachment is an open area concourse with grass, and there's little places you could sit on the bricks, and you could all be spread out with a mask on as well, and sit and talk and interact. I know it's different, and I know it's difficult. The fact that you can't sit and play, do like me and play James Bond, that original first-person shooter game, but be sitting right next to my buddies and playing Nintendo 64 while we all, goof off, and I can't have quite those interactions right now, right? If it was Cadet Hoffman, I can't quite do that right now, at least at that very close interpersonal side. But that doesn't mean that I have to be socially distanced from you. Find ways to overcome that. I so humbly encourage that and implore you to look past that difficulty. Don't let that difficulty define how you interact with other humans. We have ways to get around it, and you can still be in person, but maybe just in some smaller groups, and you have that lunch together with a smaller group. There is risk associated with each of those interactions, but is the inherent reward worth it? The mental piece of this pandemic is so often overlooked, and it's frustrating. I mean, you can look at the statistics nationwide, suicides going up, mental health problems and depression. I encourage and implore you, talk to people, reach out. The human interaction is so vital. You need it, and I know you do.
So needless to say, there are ways to counteract that. There's, as you yourself stated, there's opportunity here and now to move forward. I guess one of the biggest things that we face is just getting that initiative, moving forward and putting one foot in front of the other. I find especially now, me and my peers and we've all conversed. It's just how do we take that first step, moving forward and really trying to work with our peers.
Well, I guess it really depends. What's the objective that you want to go to? And that, in the flying world, as I look at it, what was my mission and what was the target I'm supposed to destroy? If I'm planning my training mission, my target is this. Well, I work from the target and I work my way back. My objective was destroy this target. Okay, there's a lot of threats. There's this timing problem. There's a whole lot of things. What type of weapons you might have to use, whatever. But you work from the target backwards. Well, what's your objective? That's your target. If your objective is to create a social club, well, what are you interested in? A great example of that, one of my wing commanders at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base is in Goldsboro, North Carolina. It's a very rural community. It's about an hour and 15 minutes east of Raleigh, which is a pretty growing, metropolitan area. But, a lot of people don't want to drive an hour and 15 minutes one way to work. That's a hefty price to pay. So a lot of people get concerned about, if I get stationed at one of those bases that's in a rural community, maybe it's not a desirable place. And Colonel Slocum was focused on how do I make it better. That was his whole campaign slogan, his whole 2-year tour. Make it better, folks. Let's figure out a way. There are no bad ideas. We might not have the resources to implement them. We might not have the ability to do it at the level you want. But let's make it better. Let's figure it out. And he basically gave time to people. And I remember walking through a booth. He shut down all flight ops for the day on a Friday. And the whole base was told, you're going to come here to this. It was a time when we didn't have to worry about masks and COVID. It was like all 5,000 people or whatever at the base were at this big event. And they had like 60 booths set up. And it was a booth like, here's a walking club, here's a hiking club, here's a chess club. Airman X or the GS Civil Servant Y was interested in something and was hawking a booth to say like, I'm interested in this. And people started doing things like, one of the lieutenants who had gone whitewater rafting with me and my wife and a few others from the squadron, she really got a bug for whitewater rafting and she started a whitewater rafting club. And a couple of other people wound up going on trips to go whitewater rafting in West Virginia. Why can't you do that? I mean, some of the physical things may be limited. Start with asking, what do you want to do? And work your way back.
It's kind of interesting you bring that into here. We've had some successes and failures with different clubs and ideas here at the detachment, I know. And especially now with the struggle of trying to make it a bit more physical. What would you say at our DET level are good examples of that kind of, it's not really like extracurricular, but these clubs and activities that we can work towards? Because usually when we hear stories from those that are in active duty and they talk about all the stuff they do with their squadron, we're in a 4-year program, right? Where 2 years there as a GMC, and then with the 2 years you're here as the POC. What is that realistic change that you can bring and make here with the detachment?
Well, I guess if I understand you correctly, you're asking, what kind of organizations could be successful, or clubs. Is that kind of where you're getting
more
at?
along the line.
Okay. A very realistic, short, honest answer is I don't know. I don't know because I don't know all of your particular interest. And does it have to be just the detachment? I know that there's there's Silver Wings that is Air Force affiliated, but it's not Air Force cadets. typically. Does it have to be just Arnold Air Society and the Victory Club that's here and the Aim High, which was really a Colonel Rendell, Captain Guajardo initiative to try to just let's give some of those mentoring life skills to college freshmen who come in, because we had seen retention issues historically, which we still have, of people just not succeeding that first year in college, not being able to adjust to college life and pass classes and manage time when, you know, mom and dad aren't there to pick up your laundry for you and tell you, did you go to school and brush your teeth and wash behind your ears? You know, that's what Aim High was initially built to try to do, is just help with the transition to life. And the cadets, you know, Cadet Pico last semester, it'll be Cadet Bowman this semester, as the education officer, kind of ran with that. And all the reports to me were that the people who attended got value out of that. Well, I'm just trying to get value. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want it to be a time sink that makes it impossible for you to pass classes or do the other things, the other interest in your life. That's why ROTC is so vastly different than the academy, is that I don't own you 24/7, staying in a dormitory and expecting you to, you know, jump when I say how high. There's a little bit more latitude you have, which means you have a little bit more ability to go out and live your life and pursue other interests, as long as you're doing smart things. So does it have to be a social interaction necessarily within the DET? I don't think so. My understanding, having been here now for a full semester, is that a lot of the cadets in this detachment really do seem to hang out together and enjoy each other's time. Well, I encourage that. I hope you don't just put it into cliques. I hope that you reach out to others, you look to mentor, you look to provide opportunities, but it really starts with your interest. What is something you're interested in? I can't tell you that if you go start a World of Warcraft club right now that you'll have 20 people who want to be with you, but maybe you do. And you all are far smarter as a collective than I can be to come up with those ideas. The 200 plus cadets I have now could come up with some great ideas of, I want to do this. So I think maybe a cadet-wide make it better, come up with a club, might be a way to come up with an idea or two that lets people interact more and meet some of those mental, social needs. Perhaps. But it's a Rubik's Cube that if you want me to solve it all by myself, I won't be able to do for you. Collectively, though, we can.
I know one of the biggest challenges, and I'm kind of glad that you bring up collectively, is just rallying up each other. You know, we've talked again, especially now, it's harder, and I'm kind of curious to know your opinion. You've been here for a semester, but I want to know if that had been enough for you to kind of compare this development as ROTC compared to your experiences with like wings, different organizations in your squadron. How would you say that we function in terms of, you know, like that camaraderie building, in terms of people meshing together, you know?
It's a bit of a loaded question because the organizations by themselves are so inherently different. If you didn't know, I was an engineer for 2 years before I was picked up to fly. So even being in an engineering career field and in a squadron that was doing developmental test, operational test, was different than my F-15E squadron. There are kind of subcultures within the Air Force because each career field has its own tribe, its own way of seeing the world and doing things, even within subcomponents and squadrons. One F-15E squadron might have a slightly different mentality and just based on maybe the leadership they have or the personalities that are in there. And each unit is different. It's just like you can think of Alpha Flight right now versus Bravo Flight might have a slightly different personality as the people congeal and kind of build into what they are. Maybe the flight commander drives them a different way than the other flight commander, and that affects it as well. But what I've seen out of being an ROTC, it's the simple fact that you're still young adults, and you're still growing and learning and evolving into the more mature adults that you will be. I've told my seniors this, and I've told the extended cadets this. The man I am at 39 is a very different person than the young man I was commissioning at 23. I just am. I mean, there's been a life of experience. If you count my ROTC time, I was in ROTC for 5 years as an engineering student. And my active duty time, I've been in the Air Force for over 21 years. That's longer than most of my cadets have been alive. That's a lifetime of experience and growth. So there are maybe some things that a little bit of just the lack of life experience, there, the quote unquote drama that happens when you have young people interacting. Well, drama still exists with 40-year-olds too, I promise you. But I think that there are just interactions as you learn how to deal with other people that are challenges for you. And you include the challenges of, when I went through college, Facebook was not a thing. The ability, so just using that as a example of social media in general, like the information at your fingertips spread is a challenge for your generation that I never had to deal with. That was something that was after I was in the Air Force, actually on active duty, when Facebook became this thing that people would be in. Twitter was, that didn't exist.
Yeah.
So those create challenges as well as they create opportunities. There's always that yin and yang. So what I've seen is that it can create issues as you learn how to interact with one another within the wing that may not have existed before. And communication, though, at its very base level, whether you're communicating with 2 tin cans and a piece of string, me to you right now, or over your Twitter post, the communication, the need to actually have active listening, engaged listening, and a message that is given and not just heard, but turned into cooperatively received and understood. And we both know, walking out of this meeting, that if it was a task for me to you, or just a conversation, that we know the same fundamental thing, that doesn't change. But I think sometimes it gets harder, especially as we get down on our phones,
definitely.
and we do that. So it's just a challenge that your generation faces that I never had to when I was going through those very crucial developmental years. Oh, by the way, learning how to lead is not easy. And I'm firmly in the camp that leadership lessons and how we lead get evolved and taught. Like, you may innately have some it factor that someone else doesn't have, but you're still going to be a better leader after practicing it for a while and doing it for a while than you were the first time you did it. That's a fact. You were a better deputy flight commander at the end of last semester than you were day one. I'm willing to bet that 100 times out of 100. Because you've learned. We fail forward. We make mistakes, we debrief it, we figure out what was the mistake. Oh, I've learned something new. And that's why I say the man I am at 39 is very different than 16 and a half years ago when I was commissioned at 23. I've learned and changed and continually evolved. And I hope that it's all for the better. We should strive for it to continually be for the better so that we are more human. And on top of that, you have to realize that the things you think are important now may not be as important in 10 years or 15 years. They may be equally important. They may be more important. How I view the world after my wife had, but after we had our son, our first child, literally changed. And it's cliche to say it, but that for me was true. How I viewed the world when I completed my first deployment and came back from that versus before going to it. The experiences of life help us change and evolve. How I viewed the world after working for some really great leaders and just soaking it up, like their lessons from my own mistakes, their successes, my successes, and became better. And even looked at the people who weren't so good leaders as like, God, I don't like that. And I don't want to be that person. I don't want to make that mistake, but I've soaked all of it up for the last 20 plus years and have evolved to be a much different person.
Kind of being that sponge is just take everything in as you're learning and applying it as you move forward.
When I was at the Air Command and Staff College before this, and I was working as the exec there for the general who commanded it, we also had a dean. He was a civilian, retired colonel, 06, who had a PhD, and the dean's job was to run the academics. But this is a smart, wicked smart man, right? And the dean was very fond of saying that the whole purpose of Air Command and Staff College, which was teaching majors, these future leaders, like commanders in the Air Force, He wanted students to walk away with, and not just them, but all people. He called it habits of mind and patterns of inquiry. A habit of mind that you learn how to seek information and seek to get better and learn how to ask tough questions and seek those answers. The patterns of inquiry about asking those questions, but that you seek to learn and improve. Profound. Because if we don't, we stagnate. And quite frankly, if you're an officer and you stagnate, you're really going backwards.
Nice. So we're going to go ahead and take this to kind of a different perspective now that you're talking. We're kind of going into that growing as an officer and taking these experiences, learning from them. That leads to kind of your experience now. So, you mentioned earlier, you had your CISO wings, and we kind of want to delve a little further into that. Being a combat systems operator, with more than 1,700 hours of flight time, what were some of the most challenging, decisions you had to make in the seat of your plane as you're going through and having to do that in real time?
The thing I learned when I became a rated officer, when I started flying more, and as I grew as a rated officer, again, very different. The older I got, the more experience I got. The 1,700 hours worth of flight time versus I have 2 hours worth of flight time. Your situational awareness, we call it your SA bubble. SA bubble was a lot bigger. Enough so that I knew just what should have been scaring me in the airplane versus what I had no idea should have been scaring me as a brand new F-15 CISO. You realize just how truly dangerous some of the missions are. An example could be, flying at night on terrain following radar at 500 feet in the mountains. That's terrifying. When you can't see anything except it's low illume, meaning the moon's not providing a lot of light, so your NVGs are useless, your night vision goggles, and you're just like, well, I hope the terrain following radar is working and I don't run into a mountain. And I'm flying, especially when I was later in my F-15 career, I was flying as an instructor in the formal training unit, i.e. teaching brand new pilots, brand new CISOs, how to fly the F-15, people who've never ever done something before. People who've never ever done something before have growing pains. But flying in the mountains in West Virginia with a pilot who's never done it before at night on a terrain following radar, and you're like, well, God, I hope the system works because I don't want to die today. But that was just the mission. Like, I have to train this person. They have to get proficient at it or they will kill themselves. And that's why I'm there as the experienced person to know when we need to call knock it off. To directly answer your question about difficult decisions, it becomes different based on situation. Context always matters. A training environment is very different than the combat environment in terms of its stressors, in terms of the things that you are willing to maybe accept risk for. I was in the formal training unit as an instructor when we made the decision, and the instructors brought it up in the instructor meeting, and it was eventually the commander who actually had to make the final decision. But we kicked a pilot student out for being unsafe. It wasn't that this was a bad person. He was a great young man, really excited, really, really wanted to be a fighter pilot. Like, his whole world revolved around it. He was unsafe. He would have killed somebody if we had him flying with a non-instructor. Like, a younger, less experienced crewmate would not have recognized the cues of impending danger that this pilot was putting the aircraft into. And so we made the difficult decision to say, you need to go somewhere else. You are a great person, but the risk to the Air Force mission, the risk to Air Force, which are national assets, the risk to other humans is far too great. And all your desire in the world can overcome the fact that you are not meeting this standard of performance. That's on an example on the training side. On the combat side, my first deployment in Afghanistan, one of the biggest things to think about was it was a directive from the 4-star, General Stanley McChrystal. Think about every weapon that gets dropped. It was at a time where we were trying to win the hearts and minds, that the whole counterinsurgency fight in Afghanistan in 2010, to really focus on getting the local populace on the United States and the local Afghan government side. Well, it's probably a little bit easier to do that by not blowing up all their houses. So it was a thought of the troops on the ground, U.S. troops on the ground, are going to accept more risk from the 4-star. That's a directive. People flying to support them, flying close air support like I was. You are loaded to the teeth with weapons that could wipe out the threat. But sometimes having to ask the question, is this the time to be dropping the bomb? Or is there a way for us to maybe do something else that can help diffuse the situation? So we call it like escalating force. We can do a show of force, go through with afterburner really loud, and a lot of times that seemed to scare the insurgents away. They're like, oh, the airplanes are overhead now, we might get a bomb dropped on us. Disengage and not try to shoot at our troops. Strafe, so shoot, the gun, which is a much smaller weapons footprint than dropping a 2,000-pound bomb. But those type of escalating things, it was hard. There were times where you could feel your heart just getting ripped out, because you can hear over the radio the sound of a 50 cal going off. You can hear the JTAC, the Joint Terminal Air Controller, the person on the radio controlling the close air support jet that I'm talking to on the radio, and he's directing me like, adversary, bad guys are over there. I need them. I need a bomb dropped on them. And he's the voice of the ground commander. The ground commander tells him, nope, I accept the bomb. The JTAC tells us, drop this at this coordinate. But you can hear the panic in their voice sometimes. And those are hard situations to be in.
So kind of expanding upon that, can you go through more of just kind of these tough hardships you've had to make because of wartime? And we have a lot of people that want to be pilots, that want to be in your position, and I feel that sometimes here we don't understand the business end of things. It's as you're bringing up. And would you feel comfortable talking about some of those times and experiences you've had to go through, just kind of enlighten those that are looking to go in a similar career path as yourself?
I always promised you I would. I'm going to tell you all a story that I may not get through easily. And I'm not going to give you all the details because you probably wouldn't understand all the terms I would use anyway. But on my first deployment, very early in my first deployment, I was flying on a mission, and my failures led to men dying. I've never forgotten that day. We got called into a troops in contact situation, meaning that the good guys, our American troops, are calling in and saying they're getting shot at. Well, they were also embedded with Afghan national troops. Every ground unit, or not every, but most, had associated Afghan army troops. Well, they had lost one section of their Afghan army troops. The Afghan commander had no clue where they were. They had just taken a bunch of rocket-propelled grenade launchers against them and a lot of other stuff. The whole convoy, this massive convoy, stopped, and they're trying to return fire. And again, you hear that 50 cal tat, 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 over the radio as you're checking in. And they have no idea where the bad guys are. They can, it's like all different angles. And my wingman and I, even though I was very young, the way that the Strike Eagle is built with a pilot and a CISO in the seat, the mindset at the time of our community, our platform, was that we would fly experienced pilots with young wizzos and inexperienced pilots with experienced wizzos, to try to make sure we always had somebody with a little more experience. We were doing a lot of single ship operations because there was continual coverage over all these troops that were outside of their bases. They call it outside the wire. So to provide 100% coverage, to not have a gap in coverage over these troops, we would do operations where one jet would go to a tanker, get a refuel, and then flip-flop. Because we always employ, as at minimum, as a two-ship, two aircraft for the fighters. Well, we'd send one to the tanker and one back. So that's why we always had at least one experienced person. Well, I'm flying most of the time as number one, the lead jet, because I'm flying with the experienced pilot, who's the flight lead. As number one, I'm running the show for our fight. I'm talking on the radio to the guy on the ground. I'm trying to run our sensors, so our targeting pods, all this stuff, to try to drive the fight, while my pilot in the front seat is trying to keep big picture awareness of, okay, where's the tanker? What's our gas? What's my wingman doing? So he doesn't put himself in a bad situation. So he's got a lot going on, and the pilot's kind of letting the Wizzo figure out and drive the ground fight. And unfortunately, because the ground commander did not know where this separated unit was, the Afghan commander had no clue, and they couldn't get radio contact with him, and they're taking all these shots, and they can't direct us where to find them. All 7 of them got killed. And while I know it was not directly solely my fault, we were above the fray. We were above the fight. We were not in danger of getting shot because they had machine guns. You know, the bad guys had machine guns and RPGs. They weren't going to shoot me down at 15,000 feet. There was no threat to me. So we had the ability to be above the fight, to be the ones who could think and the ones who could help solve the problem for the poor guys on the ground who are involved in a dogfight, getting shot at. Can you imagine being behind in a Humvee that's taking
all that fire coming into you and just
and trying to figure it out over a radio to go, they should be 800 meters to the east. That's the last point we know of them. So I'm trying to use my sensors to go 800 meters to the east and direct my wingman. You look here, I'm going to look here. We're going to find these guys and find the people shooting at them. And we never did. Seven men didn't go home that night because of our failure. No, they weren't Americans. So I can't go write a letter to their family. My job was to be the one to protect them, and I failed. We all failed. My flight mates, the ground commander, the JTAC, we all failed. We were all, the troops themselves and their inability to just keep in touch with their own troops. It was equal failure. And guess what? There's fog and friction in war. People die. It happens. That was hard for me to process. I maybe had been deployed for a month and had a whole grand total of 150 hours in the airplane. Sure, I was not experienced, but I was qualified. And I was the man on the scene. And I failed. And it was hard to get over. I had actually had to talk to the chaplain. And I've had to have a lot of talks with God. It's part of what we do. There is an ugly side to what we do. It's a reality, folks. People die. Men and women die because of what we do. I have dropped multiple weapons and directed my formation to drop multiple weapons. I have no idea how many adversaries I have killed, but I know that the number is not small. When you hear the spotter says you got 12 dropping that building on them, well, that's a lot of human beings. And I've had multiple deployments and 115 combat sorties. Some that were very mundane, where nothing happened, and some that were like that sortie where I failed. I used that moment to promise that I would be better. There was no way I could ever say that I would not fail. And every flight I've ever had in my life, every day I've ever had in my life, I have made a mistake. We are humans. We are fallible creatures. But I swore that I would not let that define me, and that I would work harder to be better. Again, I was very young and inexperienced. That I would not let my inexperience again be a reason to say that I failed at my mission. And perhaps on subsequent combat sorties I made mistakes, but I never again was faced with that particular failure. And I've told this story before to a different audience. I could show you all if you wanted it, but I actually have an Air Force level award for a combat sortie I flew on my second deployment. And I don't say that to beat my chest, because I don't think that what I did was very special. I think that perhaps I had a commander who just really wrote a good package. But on that award, and it sits in my office today, it says, exceptional dedication to duty, professionalism, and heroism. But what I did is that men did not die that day. The people I was supposed to protect did not die that day. The enemy did because of me. And there were other things that go into that story. That's a different story. But I did it right. What we do is an ugly business. And it does leave scars. And it affects us all differently. My wife is actually a CISO as well. She has more combat sorties than I do and has dropped more weapons than I do. And she's made mistakes as well, but I don't think there's any story that she could tell that affects her in the way that this one affects me. And in many ways, she has rained a lot more damage and hate upon our adversaries than I have, because she's a very good widow. But I look at that award, and I don't say, look how great you are, Kirk. I do it to say, you must always seek to be your best. Because what we do, people's lives depend on it. The day of my successful story, Iraqi soldiers made it home, and ISIS fighters got killed because of me, because of my pilot, because of us as a crew doing it right. It's what you're going to be called to do. And I don't care if you fly, if you drive a spacecraft, if you run a finance shop, if you support that outcome. If you don't think that's what we do, you need to strongly reconsider why you're here. We support and defend the Constitution. And when it comes to combat, we are fighting to achieve an objective and to make sure that our folks come home. And wherever you sit, in whatever job you have, by God, you are supporting that mission. And if you give a halfway, terrible, good enough for government work job, you're doing an extreme disservice to those who are on the front line. And I beg you not to be that way.
Well, that's a lot that I imagine you had to go through. And I mean, from everyone here that thank you for at least being open and willing to talk about this kind of stuff and recalling those memories. I imagine, and as we see, this is a hard subject and touchy thing, but it's necessary. It's, unfortunately a part of what you say that we have to do. And I just really appreciate you being willing to talk about that and being vulnerable with us and bringing those questions and those experiences to light, because as you say, we are going to be there, and we should be doing our best, especially with all of those that are going to commission soon, that you go through UPT and all these experiences that eventually may lead to, you know, people going through certain experiences you do. And I imagine it doesn't get any easier as you're moving, you know. But those experiences, and from what I've seen, make us stronger. And I would imagine that.
I had a sim instructor. He was a fighter pilot, retired, and it was when I was in Lake and Heath, right before my first deployment. He said the words, and it's funny, I think of them now. It's really the first time I've tied the two together, his words with this story, but I think it's appropriate. It was a close air support practice simulator, and he was simulating all the other voices because it was just an enclosed sim, but he was getting my crewmate and I, brand new young aviators, trained. He's trying to prep us for what we were about to go do. But afterwards, this 55-year-old man, whatever, looking at these two 25-year-old kids, and he looked at us, and he had tears in his eyes. And he thanked us. He had been on combat missions of his own. He had the experience of his own, but he thanked us humbly for what we were about to go do, and talked about how proud he was of us. And for those of you who have the resilience, the toughness, and the desire to truly be what I need out of my Air Force and Space Force officers, I thank you now. You will carry this torch long after I have hung up my flight suit and bid the Air Force goodbye. This is yours. It is your mantle to carry. I lay that challenge at the feet of all my seniors and extended cadets that are getting ready to commission, but it won't be me in that seat in 5 to 10 years. It will be you. And I hope that you are preparing yourself mentally for that day.
As you're bringing this kind of back to our detachment, and as the cadets, as you're mentioning, we're moving through, it kind of ties into, you know, what we want to see is, now that you're here in this position, right, you've been here for the semester and you're working through, and you have your commander's vision for the detachment. You know, what would you say you want to make of this DET? We've talked about trying to ensure that our cadets are giving it the best, ensuring that we are the best in blue, and they're prepped for just going into active duty. And you've spoken about your vision, of course, before in Lead Labs, but now that we're kind of in a different environment where maybe you can talk a bit more freely about it, what would you want to expand upon in your vision and just ideas for that?
I brought my notes because it was something I sent. Thank you for giving me the question ahead of time so I had actually come prepared. I sent this to Lieutenant General Rotc. For those of you who don't know, we have a Lieutenant General who is a UTSA alum. He's the highest ranking UTSA alum that we have. He did not go through RTC because he went through OTS before RTC at UTSA was even a thing. But a retired Air Force 3-star, he's going to come speak to my 400s in class actually next week. So they get the opportunity to meet him, and I'm probably going to keep doing that for the 400s as you go. He's very, very keen on continuing to stay involved and to mentor and coach. Sharp man, really nice man. But he asked me when I invited him to come and speak what I wanted him to talk about, and it's my vision, it's my goal. And I told him, here's the lesson, or here's the message that I give to my cadets, but in particular as I'm in class with the 400s. Here's the message I've been foot stomping literally since day one, but I condensed it down into a short little list. My ways of thinking, how can you succeed? I'll caveat before I go into it that I understand that you don't have the aperture and the perspective at your point in time as cadets to see my 20 years of experience and fully internalize it. I understand that. No more than I could when I was a cadet, because we learn so much more when we actually get to do than we could from just hearing somebody else talk. We can internalize a little bit, but sometimes just living the experience brings it home more. It makes it more personal, because maybe you can empathize or sympathize with my story, but then you see it for real for the first time for yourself and go, my God, that's what Colonel Hoffman was talking about. And I don't dismiss it to say that you are not able, as smart young men and women, to glean this knowledge. I mean, you're in college now, gleaning knowledge from a book and from the experiences of your professors and instructors to learn how to be better. But I know that some of it you just have to live. You just have to do. So this list is meant to say, if you just take a snapshot of this and take it with you and you read it, you go, as you learn through doing and reference this, maybe it makes sense. Maybe it matches and you go, he was pointing us, vectoring us in this right direction. My vision for this whole detachment is that I want to create men and women who are dedicated to the real work that they have to do. I feel that it was a little bit of a disservice to me when I was in ROTC that I didn't get to hear these conversations. And I kind of went into it knowing I had a fervor and a fire to serve, but that I did not have somebody saying, here's what it means to be in a position where people die. Here's what it means to be in a job that is revolving around the harbinger of death and what that means. What it means to try to lead people in a serious business. Because we're not Costco, we're not Best Buy, and we're not Google. There's a little bit more. It's why the public has such a trust in us. But these are you can go back and look at those slides from my lead lab and go, okay, here's his vision, here's his intent. I want all cadets to embody the core values. And you're like, well, what does that mean, Colonel Hoffman? Embodying the core values. There's a document. If you go, Google it right now. It's the first thing that's going to happen it's going to be the first hit. Air Force Doctrine Volume 2. It's going to take you right to the page. It's completely unclassified. And you click on that link and then it gives you all the chapters. Read the chapter on the Air Force core values. I told my seniors this yesterday. I think Air Force ROTC, we should be incorporating it in all of our AS years, and I'm probably going to start doing it for all the AS classes now, because my seniors had never read that 7 pages. But we took 10 words from our core values that I make you memorize, and we explained them with 7 single-spaced pages of 12 font words. Can you imagine how in-depth you can get on 10 words explained through 7 pages? It's telling you what this organization values. The ethical foundation and bedrock of what we are. And if you're going to lead the men and women in it, then by God, you better know it. It tells us how we will succeed. And it says you don't have to be perfect. Far from it. The Air Force never expects that. But you should strive to be the best you can be. And if you can embody these core values as an officer and know what the Air Force expects out of them, you're part of the organization and you're able to help your airmen understand it as well and maybe get us to a better organizational answer. Embody the core values. 2, I firmly believe in the weapons school's mantra, humble, approachable, credible. The weapons school, for those of you who don't know, think Top Gun and Tom Cruise, except for the Air Force. The weapons school, it's not just fighters, it's intel and bombers and the heavy community, space and cyber. We have weapons officers in all of our weapons functions. They are the ones who are trained in a rigorous course to be the best instructors that the Air Force has and to lead us as a tactical warfighting organization into the future. Their mantra is humble, approachable, and credible. I won't go into, for lack of time, everything about it, but you have to be all 3. If you are somebody who is very credible, very knowledgeable at your job, but you're a jerk, you have no ability to interact with your fellow human beings, nobody's going to talk to you, and your information has little value, except for your own ability to implement in your daily task. If you are not credible, you're very humble, you're somebody that easily approachable, people feel comfortable talking to Cadet Mejia about their problems. They think that they know he's not going to, even if Cadet Mejia is smarter than anybody else in the room, he's not going to act like it. humble. He may even have the answer, but he's going to let the other people on the team come up with their solutions first and then implement with them and come to a better solution. He's humble and he's approachable. But if you have no credibility, you don't know what the heck you're doing, you're also of little value. You got to be a combination of all three. And if it works for our weapons school as a mantra, then by God, it should work for the rest of us. 3, be comfortable with the notion of being uncomfortable. I've heard a number of cadets saying, ooh, COVID's hard. I understand, young man or young woman, and I agree, it sucks. You're going to be faced with a number of challenges throughout your career that are going to be difficult, and there's no way I can prepare you for all of them. What I can give you is practice at learning how to critically think, that Dean's message from ACSC, right? The habits of mind, patterns of inquiry. But how to critically think, how to be proactive, and how to look to face problems and go, I will not turn my cheek to them and let them rule, but I will find a way to overcome and adapt and solve this difficult problem, and we'll do it together. That's what the senior officers demand. I mean, that's General Brown's adapt, change, or lose. Care about something greater than yourself, to include your airmen. Now that ties into core values, but I say it again to reiterate the point. You must care about things more than you care about you. Have a strong work ethic. The Air Force is not going to be a 9-to-5, clock at 40 hours a week job. It is a 24/7 job. Now, that doesn't mean I need you at 100% on call 24/7 and you don't have any time to live your life. Far from it. But you got to be able to work, because we're going to give you challenges, and I'm not getting more resources. The Air Force is smaller now than it's ever been, and we're globally engaged. You must come prepared to work. And if that's not on your interest level, then I suggest strongly that you look elsewhere. The power of positivity and the importance of having a good attitude, being a team player. General LeMay is one of the greatest generals in Air Force history. And he was, I'm going to paraphrase, but he was very fond of talking about how he would take a room full of hard-working, positive people who maybe weren't the smartest or the most talented, but people who wanted to come in every day and kick the crap out of whatever problem they had, over a bunch of really smart people who were kind of disinterested. Every day, the power of positivity, you can move mountains. Be a team player and look to work in and integrate. It's one thing to bring up, hey, I see an issue, and bring, don't be a yes man. No, sir. But you got to be a team player. And this part of being here is learning the right ways and wrong ways to speak up, and how we do that so that we make the team better. And then lastly, the importance of balance in your life. You can't burn the candle at both ends. You got to be able to have balance. You got to be able to take care of yourself. And if you read that section on service before self, it'll tell you about balance and tell you more. I know we're running out of time, so I'll let you ask.
Yeah, no, we're getting around there, but that's fine. It's important that they get your whole thought on this, and just as we're going through, and we're running a little over time, but that's perfectly fine, because this is the kind of stuff that it's important for the detachment to hear from you and cadre, and just how we're moving forward and working with each other. So to kind of reel it in is just any last words, any things you would want to instill from everything that we've talked about today, anything you really just want to firmly root in to our detachment while we kind of bring this to a close.
Let's see. If you didn't know, the U.S. military is an all-volunteer force, right? It is all volunteer, and it has been so since the end of Vietnam. We haven't had a draft and have not put a single person into the service unless they've taken their hand and said, I do. Now, some people can get voluntarily EAD. You sign that paper when you contract, right? Like, hey, you break the contract. But you're the one who voluntarily signed that document. The government isn't just reaching out and saying, Cadet Mejia, you have to be in the Air Force. We moved away from that model for a number of reasons. I'm not going to give you the full history lesson. But this is the model we have, and it's continuing to evolve. But I think what it means is that we get people who truly have the burning desire to serve, which means you get better people. So yes, as a volunteer, that's a great thing, but understand that serving is a privilege. It is not an inherent right. You are not entitled, none of you, to be Air Force officers. The Air Force does not have to take you just because you showed interest in it. You have to earn it. And you have to always understand that it is a privilege. It is a privilege to be an officer, to get the responsibility and burden of leading your fellow humans. And with that privilege comes great responsibility. Any of you know Spider-Man and his uncle Ben telling him that with great power comes great responsibility? Well, with the officer role, you get a lot of authority and you have a lot of privilege to be an officer, to be one that is in charge of these organizations, but it comes with grave, heavy burden and responsibility. You have to be ready, willing, and able to carry the burdens of your airmen and not just your own. You have to be tough mentally. You have to be resilient. You cannot say, woe is me, because life is hard. When you look at a challenge, you have to be able to overcome, and you have to be ready, willing, and able every day to come in with a smile on your face. I call it the commander's face. Because you may be facing difficulties at home, but if you come in and you are angry at the world and sour, and you treat everybody wrong, it's going to spread like wildfire, and you will damage your unit and your airmen. They have to know every day that you're coming in looking to make your unit better, that you have their interest at heart as well. Not to say that their interest, there has to be sacrifice, and there has to be things that they do towards the betterment of the organization, but that you're looking to take care of them and you understand them, because you carry their burdens on your shoulder and not just your own.
Well, thank you again, Colonel, for bringing up and discussing this. I'm sure everyone was going to be taking a lot of this deep to heart. It's a great opportunity in general when any of our folks are able to talk with anyone that has come from active duty, and the experience you bring to our detachment and the advice you're going to be giving, I know, will serve all of us pretty well. And as we're going forward and just taking this information, again, it was a privilege just to be able to talk to you, and thank you again for being vulnerable and opening up to us. And as we move forward, well, we're all excited to see how this vision carries out, how the detachment can work forward, and I know that we're all going to work hand in hand to see your vision and our detachment accomplish and reach that best in blue status. So,
well, thank you for the opportunity. I was glad to get to be here. I said it at Lead Lab, and I mean it. Your cadre cares about you very, very much. We're going to work hard for you. We're going to try to teach you the best we can. We'll never prepare you for everything, but we want you to be confident as you go out into the world. And I want you to be exceptional. I want you to be the man or the woman that a young airman is going to look at and go, I want to be like him. I want to be like her.
thank you again, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman, Detachment Commander, and I'm Cadet Mejia. Tune in next week. Again, we'll be going over more of our regular podcast schedule. And if you would like to see more of these cruiser conversations, we tend to have them about once a month, where we're going to interview each of our cadre member, talking about more of their career fields, their experiences, and the things that they bring to the detachment that makes DET 842 the best in blue. So thank you again for tuning in.